Hey now, hey now, hey now. We all know the truth. When there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth. And yada, yada, yada. Hey, okay. So tonight, what we're doing is dangerous. Here's why it's so dangerous because we're going to attempt to stay reined in, but I have no guiding material. Generally speaking, I try my best to have an article or read from something, and that serves two purposes. One, it allows me to stay on course, you know what I mean? And two, it allows me to riff off of somebody. If I don't have a guest, I can riff off of the material that I am reading from, and it allows for some back and forth. But I am flying without a net tonight. I am going completely off of the top of the dome. I've done this a few times, but never with a topic as dangerous as a Romero film or zombie films, because zombie films are, anything George Romero related is something that I can talk about ad nauseum, almost as much, if not more, than say, the Misfits or the Beatles or any of the other anchor topics that we have here on the channel. And what's interesting is it's 2024, so it has been 20 years since the remake of Dawn of the Dead has come out. I used to watch this remake often. I really, it was a movie that I enjoyed throwing on. It's a great sort of mind-numbing, turn your brain off popcorn movie. You can just turn your brain off, throw the movie on, and do your thing. You don't have to think about what you're watching. It's an effortless watch. There's some movies that require a serious investment time. That's not true, not all, but you know what I'm talking about. You have those movies where you really need to intently focus either on the plot, maybe it's like a noir type situation. It's something that's plot dependent. And then there's just those movies that just play themselves. They watch themselves is the best way to describe it, right? It's like before you blink your eyes, a half hour has passed, and you're so involved with whatever it is that you're watching, whether it's deep or whether it's superficial, you're just really invested. And I feel like the Dawn of the Dead remake is one of those movies, and maybe therein lies part of the problem. But the question that I asked in the thumbnail of this video is the Dawn of the Dead remake from 2004. Is it, in fact, a remake? And that's one question, rhetorical question, perhaps, that I'm going to attempt to try to find some sort of semblance of an answer. I don't know if it's quite possible. So let me already see. This is why I need a guiding material, because already I've sort of chased my tail in circles, and I don't. Boy, do I hate it when that happens. No, so last night I saw it was on Netflix, and I was like, you know what? It's got to be at least a decade or even longer since I have watched. I've been into that lately. I've been revisiting movies that I haven't seen in a really long time. That's why you call it a revisit, because a revisit is something that you have not that you've not watched, or that a movie that you've seen, but it's been so long since you've watched it that it's almost like seeing it with fresh eyes for the first time. I wouldn't say that the Dawn of the Dead remake falls into that specific category, but it definitely qualifies as a revisit, because it had just been a minute since I had sat down and watched it. I want to say it's been over a decade, definitely been over a decade. Sometimes you watch a movie incessantly and then you put it down. You're like, okay, I have watched this to death. I don't need, and there are certain films I never get sick of watching. Return of the Living Dead. I could watch that forever and ever and ever, watch that over and over and over again. And there have been times where I've watched Return of the Living Dead 3 times in a row. I watched it, and then I watched it with the commentary track, and then I watched it with the secondary commentary track. There's 4 commentary tracks on Return of the Living Dead. That's how much I could rewatch Goodfellas. I've talked about this before. Point being is, I wouldn't say that Dawn of the Dead remake falls into that category, but it's just a very easy, it's a movie that you can effortlessly rewatch. So I was like, all right, let's watch this in the year 2024 and see how it holds up. Now, right off the bat, and this blows my mind. I think I said it already in the last 5 minutes. It's amazing that this movie is 20 years old to me. I remember when it came out, I saw it opening day in the theater. I had my butt in the seat, and it was a very memorable movie going experience for me because it was a very memorable movie going experience for me. Hey, what's up, Amy? Thank you for the skulls. You'll watch Batman 89 any day. That's great. I love your dedication to Batman 89. You want to get nuts? Let's get nuts. So I went to go see it opening day. I was 18 years old, and I was like, oh boy, cannot wait to see this. I was super stoked. It was like, that time too, remember the early 2000s was sort of the beginning of a zombie renaissance that really has not gone away, in the last 2 decades, man. I mean, zombies, like they wax and wane a little bit, but like they have remained popular. I want to say that what has contributed to that lasting power is TV show like The Walking Dead or The Last of Us, stuff like this, apocalyptic sort of stuff, which has sort of really kept zombies somewhere in the periphery, even if it's not like the rage. But man, I want to say from like 2002 to like 2008, zombies, it was all about everybody was about zombies. And before that, zombies were sort of very much, it was on the fringe, man. Like, to be into Romero was a very sort of fringe thing. To read the Walking Dead comic, that was like, you found someone else who read the Walking Dead comic in like the year 2005. It was like, we are best friends. And now it's like been homogenized, nationalized across, across television because of AMC and whatnot. And so this was seeing Dawn of the Dead. The remake was right smack dab in the middle. It was Zack Snyder. It was his first feature length film. He was a music video director. We all know who Zack Snyder is now, but Zack Snyder back then, he was not a known name. He was not a known name. The reason why it was such and then of course James Gunn, who, if you were a fan of Troma, you already knew who James Gunn was. James Gunn was a guy who he had written Tromeo and Juliet. He had written Citizen Toxie. He was a disciple of Lloyd Kaufman, and he had somehow found his way into being a hot screenwriter. First he did the Scooby-Doo movies, which are great movies. Those Scooby-Doo movies are fantastic. The live action ones, great casting. It's amazing to think that crop of teenagers from like the 90s is like, they're like old now. They're like in their middle age, but like, oh my God, fucking Freddie Prinze Jr. as Freddie. That was perfect. Matthew Lillard as Shaggy was like, I mean, he was born to play Shaggy. And what's her face as Velma, who I always had the hots for, Linda Cardinelli, I think, from Freaks and Geeks. She was great. And of course, Sarah Michelle Gellar was perfect as Daphne. Those movies were fantastic. Those 2 movies. Go check them out if you've never seen them. They should do like a reunion with that cast and have him. I mean, James Gunn wouldn't do it now. James Gunn's running DC now. It's crazy how James Gunn is. It's crazy to me how Zack Snyder and James Gunn have both blown up, and how they both have like, done all this stuff in DC, and they both kind of broke out with Dawn of the Dead together as a team up. Kind of weird to think about that 20 years ago. In any case, like, this was James Gunn. This was his big splash into, big budget mainstream horror. He came from, like I said, he came from the Troma world, but, which is always horror adjacent, but to do something on this level was next level mainstream shit. And, of course, and him as a writer for Scooby-Doo, that was more like a subversive nod. Like, if you were kind of cool, that was cool currency. Like, yeah, that's actually the guy from Troma. Now he's writing Scooby-Doo. How weird is that? And eventually he would go on to direct. He did 2 movies. He did Super, and he did Slither, which is zombie adjacent. It's more like Night of the Creeps, which is also a zombie adjacent movie. And Amy is making me feel like the oldest man in the world. Amy, one of our channel commentators, watchers, followers, persons. She says she was 1 year old in 2004. First time I watched it was when I was 14. Loved it ever since. Amy, thank you for making me feel like older than water, but that's amazing. And it's amazing too to think like that's Amy's perspective on that movie. Like that blows my mind. That blows my mind. For me at that time, like I said, I was 18 and I could not get enough of zombies, man. I could not, like, I just everything I absorbed, I like consumed. I was a Romero disciple. Okay. I came from when I was 10 years old in 1995. I saw Night of the Living Dead for the first time, and I also saw Return of the Living Dead for the first time. And those two movies kind of like changed me in such incredible ways. And then I went down the Romero rabbit hole. And if you've watched the secret shows where we've talked about Romero and Glenn Danzig and whatnot, talked about Homepage of the Dead. Homepage of the Dead was where you could go to sort of revel in all things George Romero. There was a fan fiction section where there was a story about the continuation of Dawn of the Dead, like what happens to Franny and Franny and Peter, not Peter, fucking what's his name? What the fuck is Ken Foree's name in Dawn of the Dead? Peter. Am I losing my fucking mind? Yeah, right. Roger dies. Stephen is Flyboy. Peter and Fran, what happens to them? And she has to give birth to her baby. And there was a story there. It was called When One Becomes Two. That was like supposed to be like the beginning of the outbreak. And there was a section for Twilight of the Dead. And we talked about that actually on another show. The point was that like I reveled in all things. So I was so like I was the audience for the Dawn of the Dead remake in the theater in 2004. And the reason why it was now I remember where I was. Reason why it was such a memorable experience for me was that opening 10 minutes into the credit sequence. Okay. I had never experienced anything like it in my life. I had seen up to that point, like I said, 18 years old, been going to the movies since I was 5 years old. And I've seen a lot of movies. I saw everything, every big movie that came out through the 90s into the 2000s. I had seen it all, man. But I'll tell you something. I had never, up until that point, I don't think I had ever been blown away. I would say blown away, but really hanging off the edge of my seat. Hanging off the edge of my seat, watching the world collapse in the most realistic way. To talk about anything with zombies being realistic is kind of a weird thing to do. So I don't know how to counterbalance that. As realistic as one could be when discussing zombies, right? This was the most realistic portrayal of watching the world end in real time. In Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, and Day of the Dead, we didn't really see the world end. We were dialed into these very sort of contained scenarios. Never up until that point had we seen the worldwide mayhem, and mayhem is the proper word to use. Never had I seen such mayhem in such a widespread way up on the screen. So I'm sitting there in the theater watching this, and I'm about to fall off the edge of my seat. My jaw is hanging open because my brain cannot comprehend. I cannot process the carnage that I am seeing. In the first 4 or 5 minutes, a cute little girl has her freaking face chewed off, and then she rips some guy's neck open. Talk about we bite. And then he bleeds to death on the fucking bedspread. And then, thing after thing, it just cascaded. And it's like, how do you end a sequence like that? Kiss of Steel, boom, right into a tree. Sarah Polley's character just, boom, crashes right into a tree, and it cuts to black. And then we hear some of the greatest usage, one of the greatest needle drops. I don't know if that counts as a needle drop or if it's just some music selection for a film. One of the greatest ever, in my personal opinion. This is my personal opinion. The Man Comes Around by Johnny motherfucking Cash. With that, and you know what's so ballsy about it? What makes it so serious, especially when you sit and you like marinate on the lyrics. I mean, the guy, he's just strumming. It's just him and his guitar until like more orchestration kind of kicks in a little bit later. Um, it's just Johnny Cash strumming a guitar with that hoarse, like rugged, gravelly voice, just talking about fucking death. Like death is coming, like death comes ripping. I've made like 5 Misfit references, just cascading, man. Cascading Misfit. Death comes ripping, but in the form of Johnny fucking Cash. Like, I mean, that's so badass. Like, think about all the different musical choices one could pick for, say, Dawn of the Dead. Like, you could go with Fear of the Dark by Iron Maiden. You could go, I don't know, there's like a million things. You could go with like the Ace of Spades by fucking Motorhead. You can go with like, I don't know, maybe Enter Sandman by Metallica. You could go really heavy. There's like a million ways to do it. And Zack Snyder's like, nah. I don't know if it was Zack Snyder. Maybe it was James Gunn who picked. No, it would be Zack Snyder, because why would the screenwriter pick the music? Although it does seem like a James Gunn move, because James Gunn, much like Quentin Tarantino, much like a lot of other auteur filmmakers, does a great job of needle dropping music in his own films, particularly those Guardian of the Galaxy movies. Let me take a sip of seltzer because I need to wet my whistle. Oh, got a little spillage. Okay. Oh my God, what balls, the balls. Not only are we going to open this movie in this kind of way, but then we're going to cut to a Johnny Cash. And Johnny Cash has always kind of been, he's got a dark kind of side to him. There's a compilation that perfectly kind of, there's a compilation of Johnny Cash's from the 2000s that really kind of encompasses what the themes of his work, and it's called Love, God, and Death. And I feel like it is appropriate. It does work in that way, but it's just, what a baller way to open it. And then we're over the credit sequence. We are just established into this world of, like, you see this guy's having a press conference. Are they dead or are they alive? We don't know. We don't know. Just the idea. And especially, we've just come through, we didn't come through the end of the world via zombies, but we just went through, a situation where what happened in 2020, which created all kinds of pandemonium in a variety of ways. So the idea of something so sinister as the dead coming back to life inexplainably and consuming the flesh of the living that was always so utterly terrifying. I mean, I couldn't think of a worse way to die. It just scared the crap out of me as a child, as a child into my early teens, into young adulthood. And it just fucking worked, man. It just clicked. So that whole opening, I was just sold. And then what the movie kind of turns into. So here's the thing. So let's get to this piece now. What is Dawn of the Dead 2004? What is a remake, and where does Dawn of the Dead 2004 sort of exist in the greater picture when looking at movies like George Romero's Dawn of the Dead? And here's the problem when you give two things that are either separate or similar, when you give them the same name, what you end up doing is you end up locking them in a gravitational orbit where they need to be compared and contrast forever. Like, there's nobody out there that is looking at Peter Jackson's Dead Alive or even Return of the Living Dead, which has Living Dead in the title. Nobody is sitting there and really just sort of comparing these movies. Everybody's like, yeah, those are, they both have zombies, but they're different things, fundamentally different things. And people love them for different reasons in different sort of capacities. But when you have something that is inevitably tied, again, we could use the Misfits as an example. We can even use, we've been talking a lot about Sublime on the channel, and the idea of Sublime and Sublime with Rome, the idea of these things that are very different, or that are deviate from what makes them similar, but yet ultimately always have to be compared because they have the same name. And I feel like that is probably the biggest problem with remakes. So let's first sort of define what is a remake and when does something stop becoming a remake. So a remake is the reimagining, the remaking of a movie. And, it can be very loose for some movies, for some remakes. The most basic of premises, like something that is so surface level, like is like, for instance, a great example. Let's say that they decided to trying to think of a good example here. All right, let's say for argument's sake that there's like a million remakes to choose from, but I want to pick this one right off my head because I think this is a good example. Jaws. Jaws is an unremakeable movie, in my personal opinion. But let's say that they decided to remake Jaws. And let's say that Jaws ended up this remake of Jaws was actually Deep Blue Sea, or one of the other very varied shark movies that have come out more recently. You would still call it a remake of Jaws because it's called Jaws. It's trying to leech from the brand identity, which is why people do these remakes. The first was, oh, here's an established brand. Let's do our own version of it. Let's update it and do our own version of it. But if you look at Deep Blue Sea and you look at Jaws, you would never go, wow, that, those movies are the same thing. No, what do they have in common? What do Deep Blue Sea and Jaws have in common? They have sharks. That's it. And if Deep Blue Sea was a remake of Jaws and it was called Jaws, the other thing that it would have in common is the title. And that would be it. So you go, oh, those movies are both called Jaws. Oh, those movies both have sharks. And that's where it ends, right? So therefore, it's not really so much a remake as it's somebody taking the title of something and taking something from it that makes it align in some way and then doing something completely different. Would you call that a remake? No, I don't think so. I don't think it could be considered to be a remake. On the flip side, you have remakes where the story itself is retold from the beginning. Similar, same characters. Maybe not every character is the same. Sometimes the characters are all the same. Same plot points, same beat. Look at Psycho. Look at Psycho 1998 and look at Psycho from 1960. Gus Van Sant, shot for shot. They're known as shot for shot remakes. Look at Funny Games 1997. And when did that other one come out? In 2006, I want to say. I don't know. Same director in that case. You have these shot for shot remakes where they beat by beat. It is literally a remake of the same movie. And those are also kind of pointless too. It's also kind of pointless. So these two types of remakes are on completely opposite ends of the spectrum and are kind of pointless. Why would you do a beat by beat remake of a movie that is great and already exists and is perfect the way it is? You'd want to break new ground. You'd want to do something new. You don't want to do a sequel. You want to retell the story, but from a completely different, but from a sort of varied standpoint. We want to use some of the characters, some of the setups, but we want to deviate from the story. The story is different. In my opinion, at the center of what we are discussing, a remake that is nearly perfect in every conceivable way, because I think the best remakes, in my personal opinion, the best remakes are the ones that are remakes of something really old, but reinvigorating them, updating them, improving on something that was flawed. You have movies that are either iconic but have great shortcomings. You have movies that are made by beloved filmmakers and they're famous for that reason because they're made by a filmmaker but aren't that great. And then what happens is somebody takes that vehicle. They take the basic premise. They take more than the basic premise. They take the plot. And then they build on top of it, or they flesh it out and they update it. In a great example of someone who masterfully remade a film that was by all means a cult classic, a beloved film, which I never really cared for much. Wes Craven's The Hills Have Eyes was remade by Alexandre Aja. I hope I'm saying that right. He's a French filmmaker from the New French Extremity. He did High Tension. He did a bunch of stuff. He also did the Piranhas remake as well. His version of The Hills Have Eyes is not only superior to the original, it's taking the same story and just building on it, expanding the mythology. It's more grisly, it's more violent, it's more action packed. There's more investment, the characters are more fleshed out, the stakes are greater. You know what I mean? That to me is that is the space in which, because the rule of thumb is remakes are always going to suck. And there are plenty out there that are an exception to that idea, that notion. And Hills Have Eyes is one of them. That remake perfectly improves upon and sort of updated. I mean, it's just slaps. And that movie's about to be 20 years old too. Another example of that would be Invasion of the Body Snatchers from 1978. The original is a classic. Everybody loves it. Black and white, Kevin McCarthy. It's a great film in and of itself. And then the remake with Donald Sutherland and Jeff Goldblum just takes it up to another level, improves upon it. And, of course, we have the golden trifecta of remakes that we've discussed: The Fly, The Blob, and The Thing. All three of these remakes took from something that was great or classic or revered and retold the same story or retold a similar story and updated and improved. In the case of The Fly, it's really just the teleportation pod and the fly itself that are really used. Everything else is different. In the case of The Blob is almost, The Blob, a lot of The Blob's story comes from the original whatchamacallit, the original movie. In the case of The Thing is sort of a mixture, right? That the Body Snatchers from the 90s, that's the Abe Ferreira one. I saw that recently for the first time. It was okay. It was okay. The point being is that there's like a middle of the spectrum where these things kind of really work. So I think we've established the spectrum really well. You have one end where it is shot for shot unnecessary. You have the other end where they've taken the title and the barest of premises and say, hey, this is the remake of this, and it just doesn't really sort of work. That's on the other side. And then you have the sweet spot in the middle where you have these movies that existed. They're great on their own. They're classics, but they're flawed, or they have their own shortcomings, or they could have used an update in some way, shape, or form. Invaders from Mars, Tobe Hooper, 1985. That's another great example. And what happens is these films are updated in a way that really sort of push them into the stratosphere of being so entirely on another level from what they once were. So now we've established the spectrum, and we go back to Dawn of the Dead 78 and Dawn of the Dead 2004. Where does Dawn of the Dead 2004 lie on this spectrum? How does it function as a movie? How does it function as a movie as it relates to Dawn of the Dead? And before we get there, we need to talk about riot stickers. And to do that, we're going to talk about riot stickers. So we'll be right back. We've got a new sticker deal at Riot Stickers. That's right, folks. We are starting a brand new promotion here at riotstickers.com, and it is for die cut stickers. What exactly is die cut? What does it mean? It's time for Sticker Science 101. Basically, you got your regular stickers, right? But we introduce a new element with the die cut sticker. Basically, what you do with a computer-guided scalpel. That's right, computer-guided scalpels. Isn't that a great band name, Computer-Guided Scalpel? I love it. You can cut the exact shape of whatever your design is. So whatever you got going on, whatever its borders are, there's no borders, there's no limitations. You take your computer-guided scalpel and you just cut around the edge and you get, voila, a die-cut sticker. So in addition to the UV coating that protects from the sun, in addition to being printed on vinyl, which makes them weatherproof and waterproof, you can now have the exact shape that you want. Well, you always could, but you couldn't for a price like this. For $69, you can get 200 die cut stickers. There are some people out there who are die cut fanatics. They need die cut stickers in their lives. You are not going to find a better deal than this. Now, there's only one place you're going to find this incredible die cut sticker deal for $69. 200 stickers for $69. And that's if you go to the link down in the description. You go to riotstickers.com/Frumess. That's riotstickers.com/Frumess. What? Sharpie Riot, have you lost your mind? Have you lost your mind? These prices are insane. These prices are Crazy Eddie level prices. If you know Crazy Eddie, then you might be old. You might be older than me. You're probably way older than me. You click on the link, you do the thing, and you get your die cut stickers. Do not hesitate to get this deal, okay? And without further ado, Future Jeff, roll the 60-second Riot sticker commercial. Go, do it.
We make stickers, banners, and buttons too. Posters and promo cards. There's nothing we can't print for you. From stage backdrops to bass drum heads. We can print on shirts. We can print on hats. We can print on pants. Cheap prices and high quality. Quick turnaround times and free shipping. We also offer free artwork support. Great customer service and so much more. RiotStickers.com. Riot Stickers, we are the bomb. RiotStickers.com. Riot Stickers, we are the bomb. RiotStickers.com. Riot Stickers, we are the bomb. RiotStickers.com. Riot Stickers, we are the bomb.
Right here, this is a great comment. I feel that Dawn is a compliment to the original and a great reimagining, high on the remake spectrum. Okay. Here is so one other thing that we need to appraise before we talk about Dawn is what about the Night of Living Dead remake? And we've talked about it before on the channel. Some of you might already know my feelings about it. The Night of Living Dead remake is, in my opinion, one of the best remakes ever. Like, it really is fantastic. It was written by George Romero and directed by Tom Savini. So you have the same filmmaker coming back and revisiting his own material. And not only is he doing that, he's changing what happens to Barbara. Barbara's arc changes. What happens to Harry Cooper changes. He changes things around. He sort of changes the focus. In 1968, the focus was all on Ben, and we all know what happens to Ben. And what happens to Ben is super important for a year like 1960, especially. I was on Instagram just talking about this recently. The idea of how what happens to Ben relates to the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., right? Like, think about that for a minute. Martin Luther King Jr. was killed in April of 1968. Those riots happen in DC, all over the place. Night of Living Dead is still being, made in some capacity, whether it's being edited or scored or whatever, and it would come out in October, right? And so in the 90s, it's like, instead of doing the same thing that everybody is getting, that's the other thing too, that was so brilliant of George. They, keeping people on their toes. I'm going to go back and revisit the same story, but instead of letting you expect what's going to happen, instead Barbara's going to live. Barbara's going to push in the other direction. What Barbara does in 1968 is very heroic. What she does, she rises above her trauma and sacrifices herself to save Helen Cooper from being ripped apart, as well as get destroyed by her own brother, killed by her own brother Johnny, who is now one of the living dead. And then the other sort of end of it, what Romero does in 1990, where he gives Barbara agency, and suddenly she switches from being in a skirt, she puts on pants. I know it sounds really stupid, like a stupid on the nose kind of metaphor, but it works, right? It works. It's like she is she is not the helpless Barbara that she was. She's not helpless is not the right word. Barbara was traumatized. She had seen her brother die. She was speechless. She didn't have her wits about her. You know what I mean? And in this one, in the 1991, she rises above it all. So we end up getting this completely different ending within the remake. So it's like, it surprises us. It subverts all of what our expectations are going to be. So it was really great. Really, really well done. Where does that fall on the spectrum? I'd say it's closer to the middle. It's not a shot for shot remake, but it does follow a lot of the same beats that the original story does. It's somewhere in the middle. I should wish I had a diagram for our spectrum. Let's say that the Gus Van Sant remake is right here. I would say the Night of the Living Dead remake is right here. And then in the middle right here is the Hills Have Eyes and The Fly and The Blob and all that. And then on the other end is our fictionalized example of Jaws and Jaws. Someone give me a better example than the Jaws one, because Jaws was not remade. Was an example of a movie. I'm almost I'm almost akin to say the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake. I would say the one from 2003. I would say that is a pretty good example. I mean, yes, there's Leatherface, but really that's about it. There's nothing else from the original story that kind of gets incorporated. What? John Russo didn't die? No, bite your tongue. John Russo's still alive. And if he did die, that would be really upsetting. George Romero has passed away. Well, come on. Somebody give me an example of a remake. Somebody give me an example of a remake where what I'm talking about with the Jaws premise. All right, let's now move on to the original Dawn of the Dead. The original Dawn of the Dead, besides being an epic, besides being all of the things that it is a very, very character focused. It does not. Yes, great example. Thank you. Friday the 13th. That's a good example of one for sure. For sure. I mean, there's like a million of them, and for some reason, they're not coming to my head. Like, what is a movie that was made like remade 5 times? Funny, Invasion of the Body Snatchers has 4 remakes. Isn't that crazy? 4 remakes of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. There's got to be something else. What else was remade? I would say, what's a good one actually? And I would say it's a pretty good remake. The Mummy from 1999. It's not a shot for shot remake, and it's not just the premise. It's somewhere in the middle. They take from the original story from 1938 with what's his face? What's his name? Frankenstein, not Bela Lugosi, Boris Karloff. They took a lot from that, and they just sort of folded it in. Dawn of the Dead takes its time. Right. It's a 2-hour movie, and really 2 hours and 20 minutes, depending if you're watching the extended mall hours version, which is not a real cut. It's a fan edit. It's actually like 2 hours and 34 minutes. It's a long movie for a zombie movie. Zombie movies generally do not break the 2-hour barrier. But here we have a movie that's 2 and some change. It's 2 on the nose. If you're watching the theatrical cut, it's 2 hours. If you're watching the Argento cut, which cuts out a whole act of the fucking movie, a whole friggin' sequence of the movie that's like kind of essential to the plot. The Argento cut is 118 minutes, I want to say, or maybe it's even 115 minutes. So it's just shy under 2 hours. And then the Cannes cut, which is also considered the director's cut, although George has always said the theatrical cut is actually the director's cut. The Cannes cut is the longest cut, which is the one I always end up watching, which is about 2:15, something like that. It's about 2:15, I want to say. 2:10, 2:15. That's a long movie for a zombie movie. So it's like this weird thing. It's a character-driven story where, and then the other thing too is the zombies are a catalyst, right? The zombies are a catalyst. The zombies are not the antagonistic factor. They are a catalyst for the situation and the world that they live in. Are they an antagonistic force? For sure, but they are not the antagonist. They are They are a catalyst that has been foisted upon the world, that has made the world what it is. The real antagonists are humans, and that's when George Romero has always done best, and that's what George Romero has always focused. In Night of the Living Dead, Harry Cooper. In Dawn of the Dead, Captain Rhodes. In Day of the Dead is Captain Rhodes, and in Dawn of the Dead, it's the biker gang. The antagonistic force is always people. People are the monsters, you know. It's 101 minutes. Really, the Argento cut is? That's crazy. If you ever want a really good like exercise, like if you want to if you really want to understand editing and editing choices and how editing can transform the same exact material into two completely different tones, watch the Argento cut and then watch the Romero cut of Dawn of the Dead / Zombie, because it's the European cut. The Argento cut is known as Zombie. These movies focus on people. They don't focus on the zombies. The zombies are, it's Day of the Dead is 101 minutes. Yeah, I was like, that's way too short. That's way too short for it to be Dawn of the Dead. I'm telling you, Argento cut, I'm calling it right now. 114 minutes, 115 minutes, 160 minutes, somewhere in there. That's the length. The zombies might as well be weather. They might as well be a weather disaster, in the same way as if like the world has flooded and everybody's floating around on ships, or the world is engulfed in fire and we're all trapped in a house and trying to save ourselves from burning. That's the type of force of nature. The zombies are a force of nature. That's what they are. And that's how they're treated in those movies. And that's what makes those movies work so well. So then we're forced to turn back and look at the characters themselves and how the characters are operating in these spaces. How are they functioning in the farmhouse? How are they functioning in the mall? How are they functioning in the underground bunker? And another key important factor that is present in these films, in the premise of these films, is the location. The Monroeville Mall is a character. The farmhouse in Night of the Living Dead is a character, but to a lesser extent. The mall really is a main character of Dawn of the Dead. And the bunker, to a lesser extent as well, is a sort of a character in Day of the Dead. I mean, it's a tomb. It's a tomb it's funny how the dead walk around on the surface and the living must be buried alive underneath the ground. It gives a new meaning to the living dead and the dead living, right? Whoa, that's a great alternate title for Day of the Dead. The dead living, the living dead and the dead living. Woo! I like that. I like the way that works. Dawn of the Dead, like I said, it's gory, it's got action, but there are long periods where the movie is just focused on these characters as they kind of lose themselves. You know, there's deep messages. George Romero was always so deep with his messaging in the films that he's making. And obviously, you know, Dawn of the Dead is a meditation on consumerism, you know, the idea of us, you know, the way that we mindlessly consume materialistic things. These four individuals are on the run and just trying to survive, and they get trapped inside of a bubble. The mall becomes a bubble, and that's why it's so important not to see zombies for as long as we don't see them in the movie. We almost forget that they're even there, as they've sort of, you know, as they're experiencing a new sort of reality where they are completely insulated to the dying world on the outside. They're insulated to the notion that there are ravaging biker, you know, gangs out there, you know, scavenging on the road all throughout this thing, as Peter says. They have everything that they could ever want. And in that, because they have everything that they want, life becomes stale and sort of boring. They don't have to sort of work. They're not hungry anymore, quote unquote hungry. They're not out there, you know, sort of living for the day. You know what I mean? And they lose themselves in the process. They lose themselves in the materials. The world has become so harsh that they have retreated inward and sort of numbed themselves with materialistic, hedonism, as they numb themselves. And it's only when the outside forces break in that they are sort of jolted into this fight or flight response, and are able to either push through. And look at what happens to Steven, aka Flyboy. He doesn't want to accept. Peter is willing to detach and let go. He's willing to just sort of, he's passive. He's not looking for the fight. It's Steven, it's Flyboy who wants to defend what's theirs. This is ours, not theirs. And when he draws first blood by firing a shot, he ends up losing his life as a result. He creates that scenario where he dies. You know what I mean? I mean, they kill him, but he allows that to sort of happen because they have mastered that environment. They could escape. They have the helicopter up on the roof. They have the perfect setup, really. But it's his connection and his attachment to those material things in that insulated world that prevents Steven from doing what he needs to do in a world that's really about survival. So that's some of the stuff that's going on in Dawn of the Dead, right? The original. Now, what's happening in the new Dawn of the Dead movie? Where are any of the characters the same as the ones in the original Dawn of the Dead? No, literally not. In fact, what's weird is, Dawn of the Dead begins, some would even say that Dawn of the Dead really begins after Night of the Living Dead, right? Like it's, the Night of the Living Dead, everybody survived the night, and now here is the next day, and everybody's kind of, what's it called? Getting out of Dodge, so to speak, as society is beginning to crumble and people are starting to abandon their positions of duty. I mean, look at Roger and Peter who have decided to run. They see what's going on. They see the carnage all around them. They're like, we need to get out. It's the same thing for the newsman, for Steven, who works for the news and is a flyboy, has a helicopter. And Fran, who works at the TV station. They have they are abandoning their positions of duty and taking off. In the case of the Dawn of the Dead remake, we are thrown into a mix with just a random group of people where shit has hit the fan, right? Shit has hit the fan, and these people are floundering, and it's a gamble. The person that you met 5 minutes ago is more than likely to be gone in the next 5 minutes. As what's his face says, I forget his name. I think his name is James Weber, the actor. He's the guy, spoilers if you've never seen Dawn of the Dead, the remake, the guy who the Sarah Polley's almost love interest, the guy, I don't know his name. You know who I'm talking about though, that guy. He's a great character in that, he's a great character. Now I got to look him up because this is going to bother me. His name is James something. What the fuck is his name? Dawn of the Dead remake. Dawn of the Dead remake. Jake Weber, and he plays Michael. Great character and great actor. Okay. So, Michael he says to, Kenneth, played by Ving Rhames, badass character, who's kind of like supposed to be the Peter a little bit, he's a police officer. Peter's a SWAT guy. They're both black. Like they kind of like are embodying this kind of archetype, or at least it seems like that's supposed to be a play on the archetype, right? That sort of thing. But Michael says to him, don't go that way. Don't go this way because it's really bad. And Ving Rhames, Kenneth is like, how do you know, or whatever. And he says, well, there used to be 8 of us. There were 8 of us just a few minutes ago. Now they're down to 3. It's him, Mekhi Phifer, and his pregnant Russian girlfriend person. So it's like this, it's this idea of like, you're kind of smattered together with these people. There's no rhyme or reason. And, the characters themselves, like there is great character to these. There is character and there is heart in the characters in the Dawn of the Dead remake, but it doesn't take the movie. The problem really with the movie, it's not so much of a problem as it is, being called Dawn of the Dead. That's really the problem. It's called Dawn of the Dead because it doesn't take the same time. It's a very fast-paced film. The movie is 90 minutes, and it is a fast 90 minutes. That 90 minutes flies by so quickly. You blink your eyes and the movie is over. And that's a testament to really good popcorn, action-packed filmmaking from Zack Snyder. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's not bad. It's not a bad thing. You know what I mean? Like, that's okay. But in the realm of what Dawn of the Dead is and what gives it its identity and what it's about, and the fact that it's really using zombies to talk about deeper issues, Dawn of the Dead, the remake, is not doing that. There's nothing deeper. They go to a mall because the original takes place in a mall. They could have gone anywhere, and it still would have been that same 90-minute action-packed zombie film. The reason why we call it Dawn of the Dead is because the name was Dawn of the Dead. In every other aspect, and it takes place in a mall. In every other aspect, it is not a remake of Dawn of the Dead in the least. It is its own unique zombie film, and it's fucking great. Yes, I know the unrated version of the Dawn of the Dead remake is 110 minutes, but the theatrical cut is 90 minutes. So we're going to go with the theatrical cut. I do prefer to watch. I used to always watch. That's what I had on DVD, was the unrated cut. And I'll be honest with you, I don't even remember what those other 10 minutes were. I think actually there was one of the guys, he's got a penchant for women's shoes, and he talks a little bit more about, his background. That's one of the scenes that was cut. There's a couple of things like that. There, like I said, there is character, but the characters aren't deep enough. They're not deep enough for Dawn of the Dead. You know what I mean? Like Jake Weber, Michael, we learned that he's kind of like an everyman who has worked 1,000 jobs. He was terrible at being a husband, but he was great at being a father. Sarah Polley, she plays Anna. Her name's Anna. She's a deeply caring, she's a nurse, and she's deeply caring and empathetic towards everybody, even people who are marked for death. The guy who was bitten, the guy who plays the dad from Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, great character actor as well. I'm trying to remember, his name is Matt Frewer, and he plays Frank, and his daughter is Nicole, played by Lindy Booth. I have everybody's things up here now, so now I can look and see who everybody is. And even though he's marked for death, Sarah Polley wants to give him dignity, while it's Michael who actually is like trying to like remove any sort of semblance of humanity, of humanity from dealing with someone who is marked for death. I mean, you have a ragtag. It's like an assortment of ragtag characters that all fill archetypes, but they don't really feel fleshed out beyond whatever their archetype is supposed to be. It's completely different kind of filmmaking. And James Gunn's approach, and you know what? I'll be honest with you. Do I prefer the theatrical release of Dawn of the Dead to the unrated? I don't, it's been so, like I said, I just revisited the theatrical last night, and I got to be honest with you. Like, I don't remember what else is in the uncut version, and I don't know. I honestly can't answer that. I always generally try to watch the longer version of a movie. Very seldom am I interested in watching a movie that is less than or that is a theatrical cut with less running time. I'll give you a great example of one where I prefer Ridley Scott's Legend. The theatrical cut with the Tangerine Dream score is far superior to the Jerry Goldsmith score in the director's cut, which is significantly longer in running time. The scenes work better as they're slightly truncated, and the pacing works better, and the music just makes that movie just zing compared to the Jerry Goldsmith score, which feels clunky and doesn't flow. I was going to say truncated. It's not truncated. But to get back, you have Norma. She's the truck driver, the old lady truck driver. It's just like everybody's like a sort of like a cookie cutter kind of archetype. And I get the feeling that James Gunn, who is really great at not only just writing characters, but, giving them heart, giving them real heart. Look at like Guardians of the Galaxy as like his prime example. Um, it almost feels like he's getting one of this is what, his third studio job, right? Like he is not focused on that kind of character work. He's not focused on that. And still, there's still heart in this movie, but it doesn't come from the character work as much as it comes from the idea of, there's that moment where they have the blackout, right? They have the blackout and they have to jump the power, and they go down and they jump the power, and they come to a realization. It's a sobering wake up call where they're like, this is fucked. We don't want to die here in this mall. We need to get the fuck out of here. They recognize what's interesting. Here is, okay, I'm realizing it now as I'm saying it. Here is one area where, and again, James Gunn is a fucking brilliant writer. So even though he's doing this more Hollywood sort of archetype job on something like Dawn of the Dead, which is probably what all of the executive suits wanted, right? Like he's doing it because that's what they're asking for. So it doesn't really feel, maybe it's not as much of a passion project as it is like work for hire sort of situation. Still, James Gunn finds a wonderful way to inject like heart into his characters via like ragtag, like, underdogs who are going to face overwhelming odds in which they are probably not going to make it. Case in point, they are surrounded by flesh-eating zombies. They have no idea what's on the outside, and they come up with this plan that seems so harebrained. We're gonna beef up some vehicles that are in the garage, and we are going to make a break for the marina and hope that we can get on a boat and just sail out to some islands that we don't even know if they're free of the dead or not. And it's Andy, he's the scumbag character who kind of looks like he's the guy from Modern Family. Bruce Bone is his name, and he kind of he again, like just very rudimentary sort of cardboard archetype character that is done super well. Like it's done really well. He deliciously chews all the scenery, and he looks at all of them and he goes, wait a minute. Or maybe it's CJ who says it. CJ, who's played by Michael Kelly, who's from House of Cards. And his character is great too. He kind of does this. He has a real sort. In fact, his character is one of the only characters that really has an arc. That's the other thing too about all the characters. None of them change. None of them have any arcs. Whereas the characters in Dawn of the Dead, they have more of an arc than any of the characters in. And look at what happens to Roger and Steven. I didn't even mention Roger. Roger, who's Peter's sidekick, in the original Dawn of the Dead. What gets him killed? He's reckless. And why is he reckless? Because he wants to lock them all down. He wants to lock them all down so that they'll have access to everything in this paradise. And because of that, because he gets distracted, he forgets about the world that he is in. So the another theme of the original Dawn of the Dead is that if you forget the world that you are in, you're gonna get killed. In the remake, nobody has an arc. Everybody remains the same. Sarah Polley is the same character from the beginning all the way to the end. Ving Rhames, same character from the beginning to the end. Everybody remains the same. The only person that changes, that actually actively changes, is CJ, who played by Michael Kelly, is the security guard guy, who sort of goes from being a real asshole to being a real hero of the hour, as he sort of sacrifices himself so that the others can kind of get on the boat. You know what I mean? Yeah. So they have like this rinky-dink plan. CJ says, he's like, you want to take some vehicles, go out there, and then get on the island. And everybody and this is such a great James Gunn moment. Everybody goes, yeah. That's what we want to do. That's what we want to do. And he's like, all right, then that's what we're going to do. And it's like it's really heartfelt because you can sense the desperation of this group of characters where they're just kind of like, we are fucked. We are fucked. We have finite resources here. Eventually the other shoe is going to drop and we're going to be in deep shit. And eventually, of course, that does happen with probably the single, like one of the biggest flaw of the Dawn of the Dead remake. I've talked about this before. This flaw is so egregious to me. It's so bad. It just from the moment I saw it, 20 years ago, when I saw it in the theater, all the way until now, I have never ever been on board with the Chips and Nicole Andy subplot. Right? Not Andy. Oh, wait a minute, Andy. I'm sorry, Andy is the guy in the gun store across the way. Who's the modern Family Guy is played Steve by Ty Burrell. That's who I was talking about before. The guy who has the boat. Andy is the guy in the gun store across the way that bonds with Ving Rhames' character Kenneth as they take turns sharpshooting. In any case, there's this whole subplot of Nicole goes to rescue her dog, and then everybody goes to rescue Nicole. And it could be argued, hey, there's agency to rescue Nicole because we can also rearm ourselves, but we're also putting the entire mission in jeopardy to rescue one of our party. And I feel like in Dawn of the Dead, the original, in any other scenario, that never would have happened. They would have left her. And you know what? I gotta be honest. This is kind of fucked up to say. A better movie, a better turn. And this is me being a guy on the internet being bold enough to rewrite James Gunn. Ready? I'm going to do it right now. What should have happened in Dawn of the Dead, what would have worked better mechanically for the story. Ready? Nicole, whose dog is Chips that they send over with the sandwiches for Andy, who gets bit in the process. She drives the truck, which is the same brand as what they drove in the original Dawn of the Dead. She drives the truck to Andy's gun emporium, and she gets trapped over there, right? What would have been a sort of better, what I think would have worked better, what would have been way more fucking brutal in a way. Maybe it wouldn't have been as action-packed as what they did in the movie, because what they did in the movie was really action-packed and super entertaining, right? The subterranean sequence when they're in the sewer, that was good. I mean, that was terrifying. And I guess one could argue and say, hey, we needed to do this in order to get to that. I feel like maybe there might have been other ways that they could have done that. Maybe they needed, I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and figure out why they needed to do that, but that would have worked better than a rescue mission for Nicole. But would have maybe been cooler or worked better is that Nicole's love interest, Terry, who's the other security guard, who kind of he also has a slight turn a little bit. Well, he has a character moment where he has to decide whether he wants to be with his security guard buddies, CJ and the other guy that gets eaten in the parking garage, or if he wants to be with the survivors that they just met. And of course, he wants to be with the survivors that he just met, where maybe they tell Nicole, she calls out to them. She's trapped in the closet. And she goes, help me. And they're like, you did that to yourself. We can't help you. We can't put the rest of the group at risk. The group takes a vote and decides to leave Nicole trapped with Andy. And only Terry, who loves her, he says, give me a gun. And he's going to go to be with her and splits off from the group to be with her instead. And we never find out what happens to them. How about that? It's left completely ambiguous. They're probably going to die. He's probably going to die trying to get to her. Maybe he gets bitten. Oh, even better. Ready? He goes off to try and get her. That's like a separate sidebar as they're pushing on. You could do the exact same thing. They're running away from the zombies. They're pushing to get into the trucks to go to the marina. All that doesn't change. The only difference is that Terry takes the sewer to get to Nicole, gets bitten in the process, rescues Nicole, and now he's going to turn, and she's just willing to stay with him, kind of like Tina and Freddy style in Return of the Living Dead. That would have been fucking bad. It would have been really dark. That would have been really bad. That would have been a really cool kind of alternative thing, okay? Hindsight is 2020, 20 years later. Where was I going with all that? The point is that that whole subplot of rescuing her was just, it never worked for me then, didn't work for me last night when I was watching. I'm just going, nope, 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 nope. That is not what they would not do that. A group would not jeopardize the group's welfare for one individual like that. I don't know. It just wouldn't happen. I'd like to imagine it would not happen. So the point of all this is to say is, where does Dawn of the Dead, because we got to wrap this up, right? We got to wrap this up. We can go on and on about this. Where does Dawn of the Dead 2004 fall on our spectrum that we've kind of established? And I would say that it is away from the middle. It is more premise based. It's a premise remake. It is not a shot for shot remake, and it's not a remake that improves on the original. So therefore it goes in the corner of the premise stuff, what I was talking about with Jaws and Deep Blue Sea, right? The idea that we took the name, we took zombies, and we took them all, and we told a completely different story. And we're using the name Dawn of the Dead. So ultimately, we'll always be compared to Dawn of the Dead for that reason, the original 78. And it's frustrating because I want to view these things as two completely separate things. The zombies move differently. It's fast zombies versus slow zombies. These zombies have more in common with Return of the Living Dead than they do with Dawn of the Dead in those ways. And ultimately, you have these movies that are tied together forever, despite being different, because of the name. And it just, it's a little frustrating, but I think that because it's such a good, entertaining movie, that it's sort of, it almost sort of ascends its remake status. It ascends being a sub remake because it's really good. It sort of is elevated in just being a good movie, but it is not Dawn of the Dead. It's not. There's no social commentary. There's no real deep characterization, and the plot is different. That makes it a different movie in my book. So is Dawn of the Dead 2004 a remake? You waited an hour and 6 minutes for me to say no, it is not. It is a movie that has the same name and the same premise. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Tell me, what did you think of this episode? Was this good? Just off the top of the head, did we stay on point? What do you think? Gary X says the best thing about the remake was the intro and the final ending, in my opinion. Thank you, Gary. I like Andy too, Minister. I like Andy too. Yeah, I'm just curious to know, what do you think? Do you think what did you think of? Do you think that Dawn of the Dead is truly a remake of Dawn of the Dead? And like I said, what do you think of this episode? Was this is like a filibuster episode, just completely off the dome. Thank you. I'm gonna go. It was good. I was lost. You were lost in my tangents of things. I don't know if that makes it good. I feel like that doesn't make it good. If you were lost, that's not good. In fact, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it wasn't a good thing. Because I'm kind of thinking maybe I'll do this more often. I like to. I mean, this is fun to do, but it's just it requires a lot more brain power because you really got to stay on point, or you got to make sure that you come back. You got to loop around. You got to make sure you come back to whatever it was that you were talking about in order for it to really work. So, I am tired of talking, so I'm going to stop now. Thank you. Go watch it. Go watch it again right now. Please subscribe to the channel if you have not, and leave me some skulls in the comments or the chat, and we will see you again real soon. Peace, hair grease. You know all the